This is Captain E, and I want to tell you about a charity that is near and dear to my heart. The Shawn Jenkins Children's Hospital at MUSC is responsible for saving my niece's life and so many others on a daily basis. Hooked on Miracles is our King Mackerel Tournament in Charleston on July 14th through the 16th, and it's the oldest King Mackerel Tournament in South Carolina. We support the Children's Hospital with 100% of our proceeds. This event is a fun-filled weekend of fishing with family and friends and raising money for this great cause. You can make a difference, too, by going to www.hookedonmiracleskmt.com and join our efforts as a sponsor or participant. That's www.hookedonmiracleskmt.com for all the information. Thanks to all of our sponsors and especially Key West Boats for keeping this great event going every year. We'll see y'all in Charleston in July.
Twisted Tea and Myrtle Beach wholesaler Better Brands Incorporated know our consumers enjoy relaxing days on the water with Twisted Tea's original hard iced tea in hand. It's important to remember drink and boat responsibly. Choose to be or designate a sober skipper before leaving the dock. Do it for your family and your friends, your passengers, and everyone else on board. Twisted Tea salutes all sober skippers who take a pledge. Cheers, and we'll see you on the water.
Realtree has always had a connection to the fishing industry and the outdoor lifestyle. In 2016, Realtree expanded on the traditional business of creating the world's most effective camouflage patterns to create a fishing brand and family of patterns designed to connect the woods to the water and strengthen the bond between the two worlds. We couldn't be more excited to be working with the industry's top brands, retailers, and anglers to continue our growth, and we hope that you will join us. Enjoy Realtree fishing patterns inshore, offshore, on the lake, or at the dock. Learn more about the extensive line Realtree fishing patterns, apparel, gear, and more at Realtree.com. Trilogy Outdoors.
All right, folks, welcome back to another exciting episode of Trilogy Outdoors. And, you know, we talk everything fins, fur, and feathers. My esteemed partner, Senator Stephen Goldfinch, here joining me in the trophy room. I think it's safe to say, or the Trilogy studio. I mean, pretty much it's become that.
One and the same.
One and the same. But we are excited to be joined today. You know, we have exciting guests join us. We've had quite a few. I'm gonna tell you, you hit home run with Tom Mullican. You've hit a home run with quite a few others. But I think this one's going to be another good home run. And, of course, it's something that you're super enthusiastic about, and that is diving and archaeology and archaeological diving and research. And I think our guest knows a little bit about that, doesn't he?
Does. We had one of our guests' contemporaries on quite a couple weeks ago, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and that was Dr. Adam King. Today we're honored to have Dr. Jim Spirek. Jim is the director of, Jim, you're going to have to help me again.
He can do it.
Tell us what you're the director of, Jim.
Well, I'm just the division director, but overall I'm the state underwater archaeologist with the South Carolina Institute of Archaeology and Anthropology. It's based at the University of South Carolina in Columbia, and our institute is a regulatory and research agency that preserves the state's archaeological legacy on both land and underwater. And specifically, I'm part of the Maritime Research Division, and we focus on the underwater archaeological sites in the lakes, rivers, and coastal waters of South Carolina. And we accomplish our mission through multiple avenues, including field work, historical research, working with federal and state agencies, sponsoring avocational activities, engaging with the public, and really any way to promote an awareness and appreciation and preservation of the scientific, educational, and recreational value of this archaeological record in the state. So it's a great job, and I always enjoy talking to folks who appreciate that, whether it be on the radio or even at the boat landing.
I don't know how
a lot of times.
I don't know how you fit all that onto a business card, but that was a very, very long,
exactly,
a very long introduction. But you know, you do a lot, and English Captain E has said this multiple times on this show. We have a fairly dynamic, diverse show. And we do a lot of talking about a lot of different things. And today we're going to talk about something that's interesting to me, underwater archaeology. And specifically, Jim, you and I have worked on a couple of different projects together. And I want to talk about it. So please, English, Jim, Dad. By the way, gosh, I'm terrible at this, English.
Yeah, there's a guy down on the end down there, you know, a little bit.
I'm terrible at this. we are bad at introducing. Both of us are.
We are. We kind of get going.
We get going, and we don't introduce our guests very well. I have joining us in the Trilogy Outdoor Studio today, the guy who is responsible for
you being here.
Totally responsible.
I
In
was
all ways.
I was waiting on him to chirp in on that. Have my dad, my pops here, who is seriously responsible for me getting into diving and underwater, my interest in underwater archaeology, spearfishing, most of those things, and so he's very interested in the same, and that's the reason he's here, because he wants to, I'm sure, bend the ear of our state underwater archaeologists. We also have with us Mark and Susan Thomas, who are friends of ours from Essex, England, and truthfully, we just decided to bring them on because we thought it would help with ratings. Their accents are beautiful.
There you go.
So anyway,
The truth makes a big difference.
we have formally introduced our guest, our in-studio guest, and we formally introduced Jim. So Jim, let's get to it.
Can I dive in with a question first?
Yeah, sure.
You mentioned coastal waters, so I'm diving in with no tank on. What qualifies as your waters that you control? I mean, are we talking the line of demarcation, 3 miles, or do you cover all the waters off the coast of South Carolina?
So coastal waters, we from mean low tide out. So you know, from the beach at low tide and then out to 3 miles out.
Okay.
And then it gets into federal waters.
Right, that's where it gets fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've arrested a few wrecks actually, and you and I've talked about some of this, Jim, and and you are actually working on a project that you and I have collaborated on a project a little bit, and I want to talk about that. But before I forget about it, this is what I'm going to say in the beginning. I don't want any of you to let me forget for us to talk about my recent discovery, which I think, Jim, you tell me if I'm wrong, looks like a dugout canoe.
It looks like a dugout canoe that got embedded into the riverbank there. And, you know, when you showed me the coordinates and all, I took a look at it. And, I was wondering, well, could it be perhaps, maybe a rice trunk that's eroded out, since it looked a little squarish, at least on, on the side of the gunnel area of what remained of the canoe. But it definitely looks like a watercraft, and so we look forward to either going out with you or taking a trip out there to go take a look at it. And usually, I'd say, and since my career here, I'd say we always get a call about a dugout canoe, whether it's prehistoric or historic, about twice a year or so.
Yeah.
And we try and go out and take a look at them, or at least get pictures of them. Sometimes they turn out not to be a dugout canoe, but we always want to make sure.
But this one looks like a dugout to you.
Yeah, it looks like it. And, we have to take a little more closer inspection, just, see the tool marks. And then, does it look like it could be prehistoric? To me, it doesn't quite look like it's prehistoric. You saw it better than I, but, we didn't see any burn or scrape. You didn't see any charring in the interiors, which suggests that it's historic. Looked like it's probably made out of a cypress log. Is that what you would think?
Yeah, it looks like one giant cypress log that they chipped into they definitely made a bow out of it, which, it's too perfect not to be a bow. The floor's flat. There were gunnels. You could tell where their gunnels, obviously, it eroded out into the channel. The gunnels had eroded that were sticking out into the channel. I'm guessing the gunnels under the mud are still there, because you can see them starting to creep out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, look, you're the expert, not me, and I hope you get to take a look at it. I'm going to call it a dugout canoe from now on, because it sounds like a cool find to me.
There you go.
I've never found one before, but we're not going to reveal the coordinates on this show here today.
No.
But we're going to have an expedition. We're going to videotape it when you come. We're going to have a little expedition, and I want you to declare for us that we have found a dugout canoe. Oh, one point.
I'll try not to disappoint.
Do you have your $36 permit? I'm sorry, $18 permit, your 2-year permit from him?
For fossils?
Well,
I don't think I can dig a dugout canoe with my hobby license.
Your hobby license, that's it, $18.
Can I dig a dugout? Jim, you would know the answer to this, and I know.
I think that's going beyond the bounds.
Going a little beyond.
That's what I figured.
Well, that's too bad. That's
Yeah.
too bad. I had plans to hang it in my rafters.
Well, that's obviously one of the things most people think when they find something is how do we recover it, which is always a great enthusiasm in the beginning, but then when costs and what's the final destination of this canoe, that's part of the equation when we decide to whether recover it or not. And a lot of times we just leave it in place, record it, and maybe get some samples to radiocarbon date it, and it's just the way it is sometimes. Sometimes when there is a lot of uh, public pressure, not pressure, but just public incentive to want to recover it, then we'll, continue down that path. And so, like I said, all these dugout canoes that are discovered, since my time, we've recovered like 3 of them.
Well, we're recovering this one. We're not leaving this one in the mud, Jim. This one's special. This one's got my name on it somewhere. It's special.
Well, if we can find a good spot for it and we got the financial wherewithal, then we can investigate that for sure.
We'll figure out the finances.
I wanted to ask a question as someone who's not very intelligent about these different things. I mean, I might get excited and say, "Oh, look at here! I found this," and pull my boat up and pick it up and figure out my redneck buddies. We drag it down the river, take it to a boat landing, pull it out, take it home, take pictures of it. Obviously, you want to keep water on it. I know a couple little tricks about that part of it. Keep it wet and stuff. Don't let it dry out completely. But that's not right. We can't do that. Isn't that? I mean, we can't. That's where we have to reach out to you for.
Yeah, that's anything larger than like hand collecting, which y'all mentioned about the hobby license diver. As long as you can bring it up by hand, it's fine. But any type of larger artifacts, then we move into the second stage of licenses that the state issues, which we call exclusive licenses. And so we'd set up an intensive survey license where a person would sort of tell us what their game plan is, and then we go over all the details, and then that could perhaps then move on to the data recovery level license, into which then you would recover the artifact. And so again, that's underwater archaeology in a sense is great because it preserves things so well, or at least underwater materials that get preserved in the mud, like you saw with that canoe, or at least that half that's in the canoes or in the mud bank is probably well preserved. But then it means then as soon as you bring it out, it wants to fall apart, and that's where it becomes costly to preserve. And that's where, like I said, there's always great enthusiasm in the beginning, but then you're 4 or 5 years into the process, people start falling out of the woodworks, and money starts drying up, and then all of a sudden you're left with the canoe with nowhere to go.
Yeah, that's when it's going in my rafters. Now, Jim, so what is the what's the technical process? So if you find a canoe and you want to recover it, and you call Jim Spirek, and Jim Spirek says, "I'm not interested," or he comes and you come and survey, and you're not interested. Is there a technical process for somebody to actually recover it on their own?
Well, we would keep oversight of it for sure, and in the most case, we would retain title to the canoe, and then we would come up with some type of loan agreement between the individual or the organization, hopefully. That they would, conserve the canoe, that they would then curate it in the facility, especially keeping it in an air-conditioned environment, and then, exhibition as well. And we've done this in the past, sort of a public and state partnership down in Defusky Island. There was a canoe eroding out of the Turtle Island, so right at our southern borders there with Georgia. Was eroding out of a bank and getting hit by the ocean waves right just south of Defusky Island. And so there was a local entrepreneur who was interested in recovering it and conserving it and curating and displaying it at his local museum. And so when all that sort of came together, we recovered it with him, brought it to Defusky Island, and he conserved it at his restaurant so people could, while they were dining, could take a look at it while being conserved. He set up a nice little display for it. And so it was there for about 3 or 4 years, then came out of the conservation process, and then we moved it over to his museum, the Bloody Point Lighthouse Museum. And so it's there on display there. So there are, ways and mechanisms to work with private individuals, although typically we prefer to work with an organization, that we know would have the financial wherewithal. But this person is really interested in underwater archaeology as well as just the local archaeology of that part of the state. So far it's been a great way of preserving, this historic canoe is what it turned out to be.
And these dugouts that we're talking about, for people who are listening that don't really quite understand this, let's give them a little bit of texture and background. These are canoes traditionally made out of cypress logs, dug out with axes by either prehistoric or historic Indians, Native Americans living in South Carolina, anywhere from like the Waccamaw tribe to the PD to the Siwi to the you name it. What am I missing there? Give us a little more texture.
Well, for some of the prehistorics, I always can tell between the two dugout canoes when they're found is, as I mentioned, that burn and scrape. And so that's probably the earliest ways that Native Americans in South Carolina and elsewhere throughout the world as well would carefully burn parts of the tree and then scrape it away and just till they hollowed it out and shaped it the way they like. So those are typically much earlier, from late Archaic, so say 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, when those types of dugout canoes came into existence and used for all sorts of purposes: fishing, traveling, of course, ferrying from one side of the river, ocean body, to another, or not ocean body, but at least a bay. And then, of course, when the Europeans come in, they adopt some of those same techniques, as well as bringing over what they knew anyways, and using, as you said, cypress logs, sometimes pine trees as well, since they're nice and long and straight. And then then we begin to see, axe and iron tools being used in different shapes. And so those then we can tell are, historic period canoes. We don't have to use radiocarbon dating to figure that out, just looking at how it was constructed. And then, dugout canoes are used, I don't know, your dad's father may have seen people using dugout canoes hunting in the Waccamaw area. They're used, up until at least 1940s or 50s. And by then they start to become very thin. And that's why I'm interested in the one you found, is to see if there's any gauge holes. So, the canoe builder would, keep honing the interior of the canoe, but then they would drill through in certain spots we call gauge holes to see how much thinner they could go. Then they'd stop, and then they'd come back and plug it with a wooden dowel, and then, make it watertight as well. So those usually a little, say late, or, it could be 1800s on up is what we'd expect to see those type of dugout canoes.
And they're making them thinner to make them lighter.
Yeah, lighter and easy navigable and all. So, some of these are extremely large, and, there's accounts of the early colonials, canoeing and paddling with the Native Americans, like 20, 30 foot, 40 foot canoes with, 10, 20 people in them.
Yeah. And
so these were quite large, and that's how you got around from Native American times, and then early colonial period as well, going the way, coming from, I do a lot of research in Port Royal. So they'd go like to Port Royal and then go on down to Florida in these canoes.
Wow.
Yeah, I'd say this one, I have no idea how far it goes up in the mud, but just till from bank to bow, I'd say it's 25 feet long.
Wow.
It's
big.
size.
Yeah, it's big.
It's a big one. Yeah, it's a big one.
And I have one that was colonial that was used right up until the 1940s, as you mentioned. My grandfather has actually been in it, so it was. It's interesting to actually have it still.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Yeah, you see, I don't know if you all used to go to Litchfield Fish House or whatever when it was there, but they had a nice dugout canoe that had those gauge marks there on the side of the wall. And I'm trying to think, various museums there. Georgetown County Museum I know has some. So they're all over the place. From people finding them in the swamps or whatever freshwater environment helps preserve them as well.
Yeah. All right, Jim, I want to move past dugouts if we can, because you're doing something that's really interesting to me, although dugouts are interesting as well, but you're doing something really interesting to me right now. and that's the Vasquez de Leon.
Mm-hmm.
And I would venture to say most people don't know the story. We've talked about it on the podcast a little bit, English, but most people don't know the story, know the people involved, know about the colony, the proposed colony or the lost colony, whatever you want to call it. Would you give us a little background on that and what you're doing?
All right. So, Lucas de Vasquez de Leon had organized an expedition, and he's Spanish. And so this was Spain's first attempt to colonize what would become North America. And so he gathered together a fleet of 6 vessels and about 600 colonists that were leaving from the island of Hispaniola in the Caribbean, what we know today as Dominican Republic and Haiti. And they left from Santo Domingo in 1526. And they had done a little bit of exploring beforehand, and that's why they were, wanting to come and try and find the Rio Jordan, as they call it, sort of a, Dr. Paul Hoffman, who's written about this expedition quite extensively, sort of was calling it Spain's attempt to try and find a new Andalusia, a new breadbasket here in the New World. And so these 600 colonists came to what we believe was either Guiana Bay or the Santee River Delta. And so they came in, but their flagship, as we would call it, the Capitana, which was loaded with most of the material for the new colony, wrecked on the shoal. And so they were able to, the rest of the fleet apparently made it in, and then they salvaged some of the wreck for about a month. And so that's sort of the first, they made like a temporary, you wouldn't call them a colony, but more of a salvaging and, survival camp, possibly in Guiana Bay or, maybe further up the Santee River. And so they worked there for, several months, and then they departed and they headed south. And so, I listened to your podcast with Dr. Walter Edgar, and I know you mentioned it to me in the email, but I think what he was referring to was, the colony was not in Guiana Bay, but rather, further down. And that's where he mentions Port Royal Sound, perhaps, could have been there, or people have it a little further north. But would really help us pinpoint that colony would be the finding of that shipwreck. And so Dr. Paul Hoffman is, reviewed his notes, and he gave us a lecture a few years ago in which he, has refined it. He believes the shipwreck occurred on the Santee River Delta. And so a few years ago with my boss, Chris Amer, who was my former state underwater archaeologist, we had done did about several years of survey off of Guiana Bay looking for the Capitana shipwreck. And we knew we'd find other wrecks. We sort of call it, casting an electronic net out there. We use, various tools, the magnetometer, the text iron or steel, so cannons, anchors, and things like that, side scan sonar to picture the bottom. And then if need be, a sub-bottom profiler if something's buried that we can't, quite, put a hydro probe, as we call it, to see if we can't tink and see what's down there below the sediments. But in any case, we knew we'd find other wrecks, and so we found, several Civil War wrecks, and investigated those a little bit. But we didn't find, any target that really suggested a 16th century Spanish shipwreck. And so we sort of let the survey, go down. We were using private funds to find it. And then a few years ago, Senator Goldfinch, who came to my attention and said, would you like to resume the search again? And of course, I said, sure. And so we received a legislative earmark to launch the project. And we have just started we've completed 2 weeks of survey offshore of the Santee River Delta. And I know you guys know that area to some degree. It's unmarked and quite shoaly. So it took us a little bit of poking our nose out there and making sure we weren't hitting a sandbar or get swamped by a rogue wave out there. But I think we've blazed a good trail to where we can go out and just right now we're just methodically moving back and forth. We call it mowing the lawn, and we're going every 15 meters. We go for about 1.5 miles and then make a turn 15 meters and then keep, head the other way. And so we're just doing this methodically. And so right now, I think we've completed about 1/4 of our area in the marine and the water side of things. But another thing that we need to understand is how things have changed perhaps from the 1500s to now. And the greatest change was when they built the Winyah Bay jetties.
Yeah.
So just, slightly further north of our survey area now is that particularly that south jetty has accreted. So when they built it, it went that, the end of the jetty is up towards land, towards Cat Island or South Island area, and then came out to the ocean. Well, now that area the land has accreted out from the island to about 2.5 to 3 miles. And so we've seen a nautical chart from 1855 before the jetty was built where the wreck is right on the beach line. Well, now if you georeference that, sort of put the old historical chart onto the modern landscape, it's about actually 2.5 miles inshore. So if we want to find this wreck, we also want to look in the water, but we also want to look under the beach in the tidal marshes in which, perhaps it's buried under there.
Wait just a second, Jim. So I have always been interested in this idea because I actually found years ago we used to live overlooking Bulls Bay and Bull Island, and so I used to tromp across Bull Island all the time looking for little creeks to fish in, little nooks, little impalements, and actually found a shipwreck in the dunes on Bull Island. I mean, it's on the north end of Bull Island, but I mean, way up in the dunes, 400 or 500 yards up in the dunes. And that's sort of what got my head wrapped around this idea that, I mean, the shoreline has changed tremendously. Now, you're telling me 2.5 miles inland, there's a shipwreck.
Wow.
I mean, it just blows that. I don't know about y'all. That just blows my mind. I mean,
just because of that, man-made interference of how, what the natural processes are. And so, like I said, we got to take that into account. So that's where all the historical and geological research, and we worked with a few folks with Coastal Carolina to sort of figure that out as well. So yeah, to really find this thing, we can't just, stay in the ocean. We got to take a look at land as well, or at least that intertidal and marsh area. And so, we can't use our traditional marine remote sensing items. So we're going to take to the sky. And with the funds that we received, we obtained a drone and with a specialized magnetometer, and as well as a radar altimeter, in which we can say, tell this drone to just fly about 3 feet above the ground and just do it like we're doing on the boat, except on the beach and then over the marsh. And it's sometimes obviously with trees and all, we'll have to figure that out. But we're just going to methodically move it up and down like we're doing on land and see if we can't find a target. And, what would help also, confirm that theory is if we did find that 1855 shipwreck there in the middle of the marsh somewhere. So that's sort of what we're hoping to see as well. But, based on talking to the geologists and everything is, that land has accreted. And, like you said, Senator Goldfinch, you see a wreck up in the dunes, and, another, parallel case would, if you go down to Fort Moultrie there on the bottom of Sullivan's Island, with the jetties there, there's several blockade runners that were, in the water when they wrecked. Well, now with the construction of that jetty, they're about 100 feet into the shoreline. And so those, we have done some, just using a regular land magnetometer have confirmed that. And then around Fort Moultrie again, there's about 4 or 5 of them under the dunes. And so this aerial drone will help us on El Yon, but it also help us with other shipwrecks that we know that are buried throughout the state as well.
So you haven't done your aerial magnetometer yet. You're still waiting to do that.
Yeah, so right now we're just doing the marine, and then probably in the fall we'll start that. Part of it is, obviously testing the system. And so we're going to do a few little areas, on land before we start getting a little venturesome and hit the beach and then hit the marshes. And Bob, and then also going to do some dry shoals as well that are over there at the Santee.
And Jim, to be clear, we're talking about Yawkey. We're talking about South Island.
Around the Yawkey, the whole area there. So it's sort of South Island, so on the south end of Winyah Bay. And then at North Santee, the inlet there as well. So that'll be sort of the bounding. We're not going to do the whole area from all the way to Winyah Bay at this point, but more concentrate towards the North Santee and then the South Santee as well.
Yeah, so it could be Yawkey or Cat Island, or I guess it could be. It wouldn't be on the other side of the Santee, right? It'd be on the north side of the Santee, if anywhere, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So it'd be on Yawkey or Cat Island.
Possibly.
More likely than not. We've got 500 plus years of growth, so I mean it could be it could be under I don't know 10 feet of pluff mud. Right?
That'd be the worst case scenario.
Yeah, I mean
Yeah, no doubt.
And your magnetometer. I mean, I've run magnetometers offshore before, and do you expect to be able to get that deep with the aerial magnetometer you have?
Well, like I said, it's a factor of mass and how close we can get the drone to the object.
And isn't the other thing that, I mean, there's really nothing metal other than the anchors on the wreck, right? So
it could be, they probably weren't they'd probably be some artillery perhaps.
Yeah. Okay.
A lot of these early Spanish wrecks is, as well as later wrecks as well from the Spanish, is they would keep the sheet anchor, which was their largest anchor, they would keep that low in the hold and only throw that out in an emergency. Well, usually they wrecked before they could get that anchor out. So a lot of times in some of these early wrecks, you'll find that sheet anchor just sitting right there on top of the ballast mound. So definitely a magnetic beacon of where the wreck is. So that would be the best case. And like I said, there was some salvage. So, we'll really at this point, we're going to have to look at almost any magnetic anomaly and not discount them. And so, the first survey, what we do is we just sort of, we're going out there, at least on the marine side, we're going 6 to 7 knots and, hopefully find a target. And then we'll come back and do refining operations and then really trying to determine where it's at and then slow down and also get some better sonar imagery as well. And that'll tell us, is the object exposed? If it's exposed, what does it look like? And if it isn't exposed, then we know we're going to have to do a little bit of digging and using our hydro probe, just sort of shooting water from a pump through a garden hose and then in through a 10-foot pole to figure out how deep the object is. And then if it's deeper than that, then we'll have to go back to the planning board to figure out how much effort we want to expend to see what it is. And that'd also be where we deploy a sub-bottom profiler to penetrate below the sediments. That would perhaps give us an idea of, the extent and depth of the object as well. So, we'll have to just use various object or tools to try and figure out what's down there.
That's very cool. So did you get any reasonable hits offshore?
We've got a few right now. Nothing that like leaps out that it's a wreck. So usually when especially with this tight of lane spacing, and the wreck should be a fairly good sized wreck. Even should also have some ballast rocks as well, and those can give off a little bit of a magnetic signature as well if they're high in magnetite. But in any case, if we have an object that is sort of moderate, and we do it by gammas. So something that's say 100 gammas, but affects 3 or 4 lanes, that tells me it's something that could be a potentially interest. If it's like a humongous magnetic anomaly, that usually tells us that it's more modern in nature. And so,
right.
Usually my rule of thumb when I'm working in a harbor, say Charleston or Winyah Bay, is about 98.5% of what we're going to find is modern junk.
Yeah.
1% may be of interest off a Bay Point there in Port Royal Sound. We found the remains of a Model A truck, so it's sort of interesting. And then 0.5 is really what we're going for, and so that's we got to do a lot of weeding of the magnetic record to try and figure out what's down there.
And that's just, I guess that's a function of there just wasn't a lot of metal prior to. Really prior to 1800, right? Anything in the early 1700s and especially in the 1600s, and we're talking about
really,
1500s.
So it'd be the anchors and cannons. Maybe they'd have a iron water tank, perhaps. In the 1700s. So magnetic or iron objects are fairly scarce on these shipwrecks. When I worked in Florida, before I worked in South Carolina, we were looking for a Luna shipwreck, and his expedition was the second attempt by Spain to colonize North America. And so that this time they left from Mexico and came up to Florida, and their fleet of 6 to 7 vessels were hit by a hurricane. And so pretty much all of them were destroyed. And so that sort of was the wreck that we were looking for in Pensacola. And we found one of the shipwrecks, and it had a little bit of ballast sticking up above the sand, not much. Shrimpers had been running over it for years and years.
Yeah.
But the one sole magnetic beacon was a broken anchor, and that's what our magnetometer lighted on. And so, we just got that one was really like a fingernail hold on the wreck. And so when we dove it, we found that ballast pile, and then eventually found the anchor as well. So at this point, anything that gives us a faint hint, we'll try and investigate a little bit more to discount it or say, yep, this is of interest.
And the Spanish would have had bronze or iron cannons, right? I mean, if they have iron cannons, those are big signatures that you pick up. But the bronze cannons are fairly valuable things. Would they have salvaged those things back then?
They could have if they had the wherewithal to do it.
Seems like a heavy
they
endeavor.
definitely would have tried to get as much that they could have. And like I said, there were other vessels there, so they probably parked nearby, and then took the easy ordnance off, and whatever was deck ordnance, as well as the rail guns we call versos, sort of the shotguns. They would definitely get those. So in some sense, it will be limited on what I anticipate finding metal wise, but there probably will be enough material to hopefully get the mag to register, or perhaps sonar to picture a very low level of rocks or rubbly area that might suggest something as well.
So in summary, for those of you who are from Lake City, in summary, what we're doing here is we're looking for one of the earliest shipwrecks in America, Western shipwrecks in America, in Georgetown, South Carolina.
Right.
2.5 miles inland in what probably is a marsh. I mean, it's an incredible story, but I mean, you can get bogged down in the weeds, which we have a little bit here, but it's an incredible story when you wrap your head around it. One of the earliest shipwrecks in America, but it's 2.5 miles inland.
Yep.
It's
so
just
possibly,
yeah, I know.
Possibly.
I mean, right. But I mean, the likelihood is that it's there. Just got to find it. And I find that to be just incredibly fascinating.
So I'm going to ask for my other fellow friends from Lake City. How long do we plan on spending on this search?
Until the money runs out.
And then it's back to Senator Goldfinch. Let's go. Bring us some more.
We'll see how long we'll see how long my colleagues will indulge me. But I think, look, I mean, I'll give you my sales pitch to my other colleagues. I think, I just did it. I mean, we're talking about one of the earliest shipwrecks in America.
Yep.
Being found right here in Georgetown County, and if we could find it and we could salvage some of the stuff, stick it in the museums. I mean, Georgetown, by the way, has got a fantastic maritime museum. If you've never visited it, you should visit it. Those of you who are listening, I actually have some stuff in there. It's a great place to go and visit, and they'd love any piece of that ship.
You're in a video down there too.
I probably am.
At least one I saw.
And I learned something amazing today. I didn't know magnetometers were effective in the air. I thought they were waterborne devices. I had no idea.
I wouldn't have thought so either.
So it's a total different challenge, though, to take it onto the marshland rather than under the water, isn't it?
Well, Jim can speak to that, but I think it would be, I don't know, working in the ocean, and I've recovered shipwrecks offshore outside of your jurisdiction, Jim. I'll give that disclaimer. But yeah, I mean, it's a challenge in and of itself. But working in a pluff mud, salt marsh environment, any time is difficult. But Jim, you want to speak to that? Some of the difficulties?
Think
Oh,
about
yeah,
all
look-
the storms between then and now that have changed everything.
Just amazing. Just
Well,
amazing.
I mean, that would be other factors, how, coastal geomorphology, how the coast has changed. So we've, luckily have Google Earth. It goes certain back, looking over at aerial imageries. And then, of course, we go back to early nautical charts, just sort of seeing how things have changed. Of course, we expect that change, but that's also when we throw out that electronic cast net, we expand it as well. So we make sure we cover any type of changes that could be there. But as your guest from Essex said, the challenges of deploying the aerial mag are one we look forward to, developing our capabilities on, because I think it's such a great instrument. I've always wanted to take to the air. I mean, there are airplane magnetometers, and folks have over the years located shipwrecks, using flying airplanes. And of course, they go sort of quick, so the magnetic anomalies are very small. So that's why, even if it's small, you need to then go back and take a look at it. So we look forward to develop this protocol, because it's the beach, and then we're also going to do the shoals. There's a big shoal that's dry always, right there at the mouth. So we'll deploy the drone over that, make sure we have 100% coverage of our whole area that our target area is. But working in the marsh will be interesting. And then there are tidal creeks that are in there, so we can deploy a John boat and go a little further in there and make sure that we with the FAA and all the various regulations, I found quite a bit of I thought you just went up and fly a drone. No, there's a lot of things that go into it, and so we're getting ourselves all qualified with flying as well as with the FAA, so that we can do this. And we'll also work with the folks at DNR there at Yaki on making sure everybody's on the same page, and include them as colleagues in this project. And and invite, of course, you, Senator Goldfinch, and others who might like to come out and see what's going on.
You need to just let us come fly the drone for you, Jim. We don't worry about any of those licenses or any of that.
Yeah, well, wait till the FAA comes knocking.
Hey, yeah.
Yeah,
We don't have a drone.
Yeah.
We don't have a drone. Trilogy Outdoors does not own a
We
drone.
do not own a
So
drone.
you guys ain't doing any drone fishing yet?
No,
No, but I tell you what, it does look tempting in some areas. I do know some freshwater buddies that are doing it now. They can get those baits deployed right up by the dam that they can't get the boat to.
Yep.
It could be killer in the wintertime when the reds are schooled up in the backwaters. I mean,
yeah,
could be killer to find the big schools of reds.
This is not going to degenerate into a fishing conversation.
Hey, fins, fur, and feathers.
It already has.
Yeah, there we go.
It already has.
I will say that another important thing of shipwrecks and things that you all know about, of course, is the ballast rocks and the wreck themselves. Becoming as the Fish and Wildlife folks would say, essential fish habitat. And so they just become natural reefs and all sorts of sea life, and very important to consider, and besides cultural resources, but also as natural resources as well.
Yeah, there's a couple ballast wrecks that have run into off of Georgetown that I found some olive bottles in.
That's the bottles, right? The bottle wreck.
Yeah, no, that's a different one.
Okay.
That's a different one.
I found a ballast pile last week.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty nice.
Don't say where.
No.
Don't say where.
Jim, how long have you been with the state?
I've been here since 1996, so I was trying to figure that was about 26 years, and I've been in my current position since 2012. And when I came aboard in '96 was during the Hunley discovery, sort of in that when everybody was tumbling about for ownership, the state and the federals going at it, and Strom Thurmond strong arming the Navy into not agreeing on their budget unless they brokered a deal with the state, which was essentially that the Hunley submarine would remain in South Carolina as long as it was properly cared for, and it would still be under naval ownership. And so that's the way it's been. And of course, Senator Goldfinch knows, as being part of the Hunley Commission, is ongoing research on that has been now we're on about 26 years or so. It's recovered in 2000, so we're going on 22 years since it's been recovered. And look forward to the one day when it is on display as, pretty much the penultimate underwater archaeological find in the state of South Carolina. Of course, what we were just talking about, hopefully the ultimate find would be Aeon's Capitana shipwreck.
Yeah, I think it's right up there with the Hunley. I mean, quite honestly, and my buddy Glenn McConnell may disagree with me on that, but
Probably.
Probably. He was for those of you who do not know him, a huge Civil War buff. And what we're talking about, for those of you who do not know, and we also have some, can't forget, we have some Englanders here.
Yep.
Welshers.
Welshers.
Is that the proper way to say that? Welsher?
That's not the way to say
Welcher?
Welcher?
No. Welcher's a bad word.
Welshie. Okay, Welshie. We have a Welshie here. So the Hunley is the first recorded, make sure I don't say this wrong way, first recorded submarine used in battle. It was used against the USS Housatonic outside of Charleston. They used a battering ram with an ordnance on the end of the battering ram to run the submarine underwater into the keel of the Housatonic, blew it up, also happened to blow them up. But I think they knew it, all right? I mean, I think I don't know if they knew they weren't coming home or not, but we sort of anticipate them knowing that. I mean, you put a bomb on the end of a battering ram, you got to know there's a chance you're not coming home. And they all, I mean, what we believe, Jim, right, is that they actually suffocated. They didn't die from the explosion. They suffocated. Is that right? Is that the latest theory?
I would think, yeah. I mean, based on the fact that they all were still in their battle stations, appeared to have died peacefully. There was no panic. I mean, this Hunley was sort of a death trap in a sense. I wouldn't call it a suicide mission, but any military operations, no guarantee you're coming home. Was that it had two accidents there in Charleston, in which the first accident, the sub started diving there off of Fort Johnson, and some of the people were able to make it out, but they all sort of were going to the hatches. So this is a very long cylindrical tube. It was only about 4 feet in diameter. And so you weren't going to make it out if you were in the middle area. And then the second accident was when Horace L. Hunley, the namesake of the Hunley and the chief financier, he decided to take control of the submarine, and it sank with all hands aboard. And when that was recovered, everybody was panicked and trying to get to the hatches. And so they died in a frenzied state. But the third crew, the one that was offshore, they were all in their spots. Their bodies just sort of disintegrated and fell to the bottom. And, they must have asphyxiated in a sense. I always say it in the unfortunate instance of like Payne Stewart in that airplane where they just slowly died and then spiraled until they finally died. Sort of a similar situation, I believe.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating story in and of itself, especially the captain. Well, I don't know if that's the appropriate term. There was a captain on board. And what was his name, Jim? Do you remember?
Yeah, Captain George Dixon.
Dixon, thank you very much. Dixon had a watch that was in his pocket that stopped at a particular time, which was a little later than anybody anticipated. But he also had a gold coin that he kept with him all through the war that they found in his pocket in the submarine.
Wow.
And there's a story that goes along with the gold coin too. Jim, do you remember the story?
So the gold coin was a $20 gold piece that was supposedly given to him by his fiancee or girlfriend, Queenie Bennett. He was from Alabama, Dixon was, and came with the submarine where it had been built in Alabama, in Mobile, and then brought to Charleston. But his girlfriend had given him this $20 gold piece as a good luck charm. And most folks had figured it as sort of an apocryphal tale. And so that was one of the things when they found Dixon, would that gold piece be with him? So in any event, he had the gold piece in his pocket. He was at the Battle of Shiloh and was apparently struck by a mini ball. And apparently
a mini ball's a bullet.
Yep.
bullet from one of the Union rifles hit him in the upper leg area, right where you'd put maybe a $20 piece in your pocket. And so apparently it deflected the bullet enough to where it saved his life, as well as not having to amputate his leg as well. And so he walked with a limp, though, so it was definitely a hit. And so when we were thinking about, this $20 gold piece and all, I always thought it'd be shaped like a thimble or something. They'd take the whole impact, and then the gold coin would have wrapped around it. So in any event, when they started doing the excavations inside the submarine after it had been recovered and then brought to the laboratory where it is today, they were digging the body of Dixon, who was up in the forward area in the conning tower and at the controls. They came across his lower area, brought it up, excavated, and there was that gold coin. But it wasn't shaped like a thimble, but more like a Pringle, actually. So it sort of looked like it was a deflecting blow, and I mean, shaped exactly like a Pringle potato chip is how I always say it. But so there was the coin, and as Senator Goldfinch mentioned, there was an inscription on the coin. It's after the battle, he had it inscribed that said GED for George E. Dixon, and it said "My life preserver," and then had the date of the Battle of Shiloh. So he definitely considered that saved his life. And then when they did the investigations and sort of forensic analysis of his bones in the upper femur, there was lead inside of his leg bone. So he definitely took a massive hit. And I'm sure if that coin wasn't there, he's pretty much dead, or at least, losing his leg.
Wow.
Incredible story.
Now, your predecessor, and I hate to change gears, but I'm curious about your predecessor. Who was that?
Christopher Amer.
Right. Okay.
So he was there for about 15 or so years, and then he retired and sort of left me holding the stick.
And he was responsible for that 1993 underwater archaeological report on the Cooper River, the West Branch.
Let's see, was that, or it could have been my colleague, Dr. Lynn Harris. It was avocational groups. Is that did this underwater survey of the West Branch of the Cooper River? Yeah, so that was one of, again, we involve as many people as we can in our projects, and that was involving some of our hobby licensed divers, and with our oversight and guidance, they planned, but we helped them as best we could in providing resources as well. And so they pretty much, I guess, was it sort of from Nepkin Abbey, just a little slightly, on the Cooper River and downriver from Monk's Corner. Right. And then they just sort of visually, by, diving the bottom, sort of scouring the bottom, recovered some artifacts, and then they'd sort of map it out. And they went from the, like I said, about Nepkin Abbey, and then on down past Strawberry Ferry.
Yeah. I saw those clay pots, salt pots, and all the various items coming up, and I was just always so curious as to where those went. Are they displayed in one group where they could be seen, or are they mostly put away at this point? Do you know?
I think probably the Mepkin shipwreck, which was found in the late 1960s. So that group, I think if we're talking about the same salt glazed stoneware was found on that wreck.
Yep.
Those were pretty much taken into private hands, and I guess we got some type of report from those folks, not too much, because it was still early days of the program. Sort of underwater archaeology in the sense of state legislation begins in 1968. So they were covered in 1969 or so, and so I believe they passed into private hands. But there was a young gentleman there who was a youngster of the group. All these guys were firemen and policemen and all. And, it's the early days of scuba diving, strapping a tank on with no BCDs or anything like that.
Exactly.
So they were just doing old school diving. And, but in any case, this person has come back and tried to sort of, reconstruct the story of what they recovered and where they were. He's taking pictures and making reports. And he did that with his own diving activities back in the 60s and early 70s. And then he's talked to other of the pioneers of that time period and interviewed them, records their collections. And so it's a real great asset to us to sort of recover that real early information that isn't disappearing because these folks are passing on,
Yep.
or families don't know what to do with the collection, auction them or sell them piece by piece. So
Sure.
at least we're trying to get, recover some of that information about our past, collecting activities.
Such great memories for me. I was diving there in 75, 76, 78. And then when I saw the project in 93 going on, it was fairly big. I think there were 80 divers out there during that summer. And it was a big operation.
Yeah, it's a good way of introducing folks and bringing folks in, sort of show them what we're hoping they'll get.
Sure.
But again, letting them sort of drive the boat in a sense on that aspect. So we always try and encourage folks to, sort of go more, above and beyond hobby license reporting in a sense of the bare bones that you need to do to maintain your thing. And we really do look forward to folks who sort of go the extra mile and do a little bit of research of the artifacts they're finding, drawing maps and doing actual research and giving us that type of information. So we always try and encourage, everybody to sort of, go a little beyond just sort of picking things up. What is it you're picking up? How does it sort of relate to the area you're at? And, so we always try and work with our hobby licensees.
Yeah, we love the little ceramic pipes and all the items that come off of those wrecks. I love that. And I was showing those to my friends from the Essex area, and they indicated that they had seen hundreds of those same ceramic pipes come out of the Thames River. Is that right? And amazing how small this world really is, that you think you're picking up a pipe off the bottom of the Cooper River, and it could have been made in London or in that environment. It's just amazing to me. Have a special place for the Cooper River in my heart.
Well, that's the main, collecting area throughout the state still remains the same. So it's amazing that things are still coming out. And, as your son mentioned, fossils, that's another aspect that the hobby licensees collect under. And while we administer that paperwork of it, of issuing the license and all, is that, those reports go to the state museum. So the natural curator of history there looks at those reports. But, again, fossils are quite a big item of collecting here in the state, and what draws people from other parts of the state, the United States to dive into the Cooper River.
And what we're talking about is the Cooper River, which runs from Charleston Harbor up all the way to the Midlands, Lake Marion, Lake Moultrie, and all of the big lakes in the middle of the state. It has a rich history of, it has a rich history. It has a rich history of diving and finding fossils, but also has a rich history in that it just has just the right amount, I guess, Jim, tell me if I'm wrong, the right amount of tide and current and geology in which there's a lot of fossils that fall out of the banks of the Cooper River and eventually make their way down into the center of the river. It's a dark river, what we call black water here, black and fast, but fantastic diving. People from all over the world come to dive the Cooper River to find fossils. And, here on this podcast, we advocate everything outdoors, and certainly hunting for fossils is one of them. That's something that not a lot of people do, but when you start doing it, it becomes addictive as anything.
I heard, and you mentioned in another podcast, another interview that you did, Jim, that Cooper River and Beaufort were the two most popular areas for this.
That is true.
Yeah, that's just because of those phosphate beds that exist, stretch from Savannah River through Beaufort and on up into Charleston. So, and of course, when you go into Charleston, you hear Phosphate Ashley Road. Well, it's because the phosphate works were there. And then Port Royal was a great epicenter of the phosphate industry there until the hurricanes of 1893 sort of wiped out the industry. And then there was cheaper phosphate deposits in Florida, so sort of the industry died down. So, but again, a lot of those fossils, megalodon teeth, all sort of embedded in those phosphate deposits.
Yeah, I found a couple of those phosphate wrecks, by the way. They're in your territory, Jim. They're a mile and a half to 2 miles off the beach. I'm not sure you'd be interested in salvaging them. But there's definitely a couple of phosphate wrecks right off the beach. It looks like big concrete rocks sitting on top of a shipwreck.
Jim, do you think that phosphate mining actually moved the phosphate deposits into the main channel from the edges, therefore moving teeth and fossils from their natural habitat into the middle of the channel? Have you ever seen that?
Well, I guess, with the erosion, I'm sure the deposits would have swept, been a solid sheet, and then the creeks or rivers sort of keep eroding them. So now it seems like they're falling from the sides, I guess. And then they move down until they hit the gravel beds quite a bit on that, especially on the Cooper River, those nice marl bottoms.
Yeah.
And then things may move until they hit the gravel banks or the sand.
But there was no mining where the actual process pulled it off of the edges. And are you aware of any phosphate mining that actually occurred on the edges of the creeks, or was it in flat land?
Yeah, there's definitely over in Port Royal. So Whale Branch River meets up with the Coosaw River there, right above Beaufort.
Right.
That was the epicenter at first of where the phosphate mining took place in the state. And so they would, a lot of working along the edge of the marsh, and they'd use steam dredges and things. They also use divers as well, and then branching it out as they discovered it more up in the Charleston area as well. And then I've been to some of those plantations along the Ashley River. You go back in there 3 or 4 miles in some of those places, and you see phosphate holes where mining was going on land as well.
Right.
So you do think it was, I don't know, chicken or egg, but you think there was the mining actually created the fossils, for lack of a better word, created the fossils in some riverbeds that would not be there but for the mining?
I think they probably would just naturally be eroding out. They probably were there. I think, we know prehistoric, Adam King could talk a little bit maybe about it, but I know, that we have found at some prehistoric sites megalodon teeth that looked like they were made into a necklace or something like that. So, Native Americans were getting access to the fossils as well.
Yeah, right. We always have this debate whether or not they occur naturally. I mean, I'm sure to some extent they occur naturally, but do they occur naturally in the levels at which they are, or was the phosphate mining along the rivers responsible for spitting a lot of those fossils into the rivers? And, we always have this debate whether or not that's the way it happened or not. And I'm not sure it's going to be resolved today. Unless you want to resolve it in my favor. If you want to resolve it in my favor, it would be they occur naturally.
I'll say it was a combination of the two.
There you go. Good politician, Jim.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, this has been a fantastic.
It has been. This is another, got to be a part 1.
I love it. I love it. Very interesting, different for us, but very interesting. And I want to do another one of these with you.
Yes.
Jim, thank you so much for joining us. It's been great.
Oh, you're welcome. I enjoyed talking to you all and look forward to Padu.
We'll Thank you so much.
Jim Spirek.
Nice to meet you, Jim.
Jim Spirek, folks. Hey, listen, we'll be back there next week. We're going to have another exciting episode. We might not have all these great guests in the studio. Who knows where we're going to end up, but we know what we're going to be talking about, and it's going to be fins, fur, and feathers, folks. Go to any of our social media. Go to our website at Trilogy Outdoors Media, but make sure you subscribe to the podcast, and we're going to give you some great product every week. All right, so until next week, we're out of here. We'll see y'all then.
Trilogy Outdoors Podcast is a product of Trilogy Outdoors Media. All views and opinions of our hosts and guests are not necessarily those of our sponsors. Trilogy Outdoors is produced and edited by Trilogy Outdoors Media. Be sure to follow us on all the podcast platforms as well as our social media pages on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And also, don't forget our other brands, Southern English Radio Show and Walk 'Em All Outdoor Magazine. To find more information, visit TrilogyOutdoorsMedia.com. And remember, if it's anything dealing with fins, fur, and feathers, you're going to find it right here on Trilogy Outdoors.